The new Fire Emblem is here, and I'm excited to see how it plays out and the epic battles that will take place.
I just want to do the next battle.
You know, all this stuff is optional, right?
No, I must do everything!
Fire Emblem has become one of my favorite game series ever since I got Awakening back in Christmas of 2015. Since then, I've played a lot of the games in the series, and whenever a new one is announced, like Echoes and Three Houses, I was definitely hyped. However, when Fire Emblem Engage was revealed, I kinda didn't know how to feel about it at first. Watching the trailer, I initially thought it was another spin-off game like Fire Emblem Warriors, but once they showed the gameplay, I saw it was definitely a main series edition. Despite my initially confused reaction to the reveal, I quickly was excited for the game and couldn't wait to play it. Although I did have some concern about how the game would feel with all the returning characters and the effect that would have on the story and writing. And once I got my hands on the game at release, my mixed feelings on the game continued, although not entirely for the reasons I initially imagined. For those unfamiliar with the Fire Emblem series, the games are turn-based strategy RPGs with a medieval fantasy theme where you build an army of unique characters as you progress through the story. Some characters that join are more crucial to the plot than others, but they all have their unique character traits and backstories, and as you use them, they level up to become stronger, and you learn more about them. There's a variety of classes your units can be that use weapons ranging from swords, lances, axes, bows, and even magic. Most classes travel on foot, but some have mounts like horses, Pegasus, and wyverns. A staple of the series too is permadeath, where characters in your army can die if they fall in battle, and you can no longer use them. In the more modern games like Engage though, it isn't mandatory, and there's ways to undo it, like rewinding time, or even just playing on casual mode where they return after the battle. I personally prefer to play with the classic permadeath enabled, although I definitely rewind time if anyone dies, which some characters in particular definitely like to do on a frequent basis. I think in the future it'd be fun to do a replay where I don't rewind at all though. The series definitely has a heavy emphasis on its stories too. While I generally enjoy most of them and get pretty invested, I know some think they are hit or miss. In general, the Fire Emblem games have sort of been an anthology series. There are a few games that are directly tied to others as sequels or prequels, but for the most part each game generally has a new setting and cast of characters. Some of the games take place in the same world with loose connections, while others have no connection to the rest of the series whatsoever. Engage changes this up a bit, and connects itself with the rest of the series through magical multiverse shenanigans. The game has 12 major characters return to assist your army, each from a different game from the series. Each of these characters are summoned through a ring and are called emblems. The inclusion of these characters definitely makes the game feel a lot different than previous entries, on the verge of feeling like a spin-off like Fire Emblem Heroes. Which, even the main menu gave me flashbacks to that.
Fire Emblem Engage!
No, not again. There's definitely a lot of references to the history of the series, and moments to learn about the older characters and their stories, but that's pretty much all reserved for the side content. The main story doesn't require you to know anything else about the rest of the series or characters, and tells its own individual story, as it uses these past characters more as a plot device and gameplay feature. Which, gameplay-wise, the emblems are definitely a new and interesting mechanic. Any of the characters in your army can wear one of the emblem rings, and have the emblem attached to it fight alongside them in battle. While the story certainly pushes certain pairings, any character can use any emblem ring, so it's super customizable. Equipping an emblem ring gives certain boosts to certain stats, and the more a character uses an emblem, their bond rating will go up, and this unlocks more abilities and weapons from the emblem. Each emblem also gives different abilities that have different themes and focuses related to the character, so one may give a character the ability to use staves, while another may allow a character to move further than usual. And some abilities you can spend bond fragments to make your characters inherit it and use it even without the ring equipped. This really allows you to customize and personalize each member of your army to be how you want them. In addition to the added abilities, it's possible for a character to merge with the emblem, which is called engaging. Which, be prepared to hear that word a lot.
Engage!
Engage!
Engage! Engage!
Engage!
This merge usually lasts a few turns, and allows your unit to use the emblem's weapons and unlocks a powerful ability for you to use in combat that will often help with stronger enemies. A character can engage more than once in battle, but to recharge it, you have to either get kills with that character or have them stand on a recharge point. For myself, I generally wait to use this ability for the end of the battle against the boss of the map, but sometimes, if a circumstance called for it, I'd use them beforehand too. I felt for some emblems the buff of engaging was quite noticeable, but others I barely saw an effect. The emblem rings aren't the only new addition to the game's combat. While most classes are similar to the ones in the past, they've made some of the footlock classes into this new category called backup units. These units will now come and assist with some chip damage on an enemy if they're in attack range whenever any of your other units attack that enemy. I definitely really enjoyed this addition, as it added some more strategy to where I'd place these units so they'd come and assist the most. The Lucina emblem will also make a unit that isn't traditionally a backup unit into one if a character equips her, and also has skills to make backup units have even more range to assist outside of just their attack range. So there's definitely a lot you can do to play around and customize with it. And while backup units definitely have a lot of utility, I feel they aren't overpowered either, as they can only do a set amount of small damage and even have a chance to miss. There were definitely occasions though they'd unexpectedly kill an enemy I wasn't quite ready to kill yet. In the future, if I were to replay this game multiple times, I could definitely see myself doing a backup only playthrough, as it would be hilarious seeing every unit attack someone. The weapon triangle returns with a unique twist in this game too. In many of the Fire Emblem games, there's generally a balance between weapons, usually with the swords being strong against axes, axes being strong against lances, and lances being strong against swords. Each game does it differently, if they include it, but generally it would just give some stat boosts or decreases to the wielder of that weapon if they were to attack someone their weapon relates to. In Engage, they add something new to this system where if you attack a unit your weapon is strong against, it causes their guard to break and makes them drop their weapon, making them temporarily defenseless. This can happen to both the enemy and your units if attacked, but only against the defender, so you don't have to worry about your characters dropping their weapons if they attack someone they're weak against in the weapon triangle. In addition to the traditional weapon triangle with swords, lances, and axes, there is also a system where bows, knives, and magic are all weak to units that use gauntlets now too. I both like this addition, but feel it wasn't as impactful as I initially thought it would be. The break only lasts one defense, so after you do the one attack on a defenseless enemy, they'll pick their weapon back up and be able to defend themselves for the next attack you do. Unless of course you repeat the cycle and break their defense again. This is definitely to prevent it from being too overpowered, so I understand this reasoning. Although I feel it may have had the opposite effect, where it felt more like a slight hindrance that rarely had any severe consequences if you put your unit in a bad spot against weapons they're weak against. Also, sometimes I'd just be confused about the requirements to cause a break, as I noticed some of the enemies would not always be affected by it, and I never really understood if it was some ability they had, or if you had to do some threshold of damage for the break to happen. That all said, it was definitely a neat feature that I would very much utilize against certain bosses, or would cause some tense moments where I'd mess up, and one of my units would get a bit of a beat down. Also, part of me just really enjoyed watching the weapons bounce around on the ground whenever a break would happen.
No!
Another change I noticed as I was playing is the bosses themselves. Usually in most of the Fire Emblem games I've played, barring a few occasions, the bosses generally just sit in their spot at the end of the level and don't do anything until you get in their attack range. Because of this, I always had the tactic where when I'd reach the end of the level, I'd wait for all of my units to catch up and surround the boss to attack all at once. But in this game, most of the bosses will start rushing towards you after you pass a certain point, which definitely led to some moments where they caught me with my pants down. Especially in the early game, and I'd have to scramble. This definitely changes the pace of how battles go in this game, and makes setting up for the boss more difficult and a time crunch. It also makes trying to do everything in a level a challenge, and you have to strategize around if you want to risk splitting up your army to do everything, or miss out on items or experience points to keep the group together and prepare for the boss's arrival. One thing I wish they did though was give a clear indicator to where you have to cross for a boss to start rushing you, as sometimes it was closer than others. Granted, I see they were trying to keep you on your toes, so you never feel totally secure, and make the boss feel like a constant threat. In addition to the bosses, I found this game in general was more challenging than a lot of the other Fire Emblems I've played too, especially compared to its predecessor, Three Houses. I feel in general, for new players of the series, any of the games can be difficult, especially if there's permadeath. But I know as I've played more games in the series, I've gotten better and generally have things pretty under control in most battles now. That said, I think this is the first one since I played Echoes in 2017 that made me internally panic on many occasions. Like most Fire Emblems, the beginning is both easier, but also challenging from the fact your units are weaker. Usually once they start leveling up though in the mid-game is when I start to get more comfortable and feel more in control, but this time around it actually felt like it got scarier. I did enjoy this challenge though, and the ability to rewind time allowed me to correct the many fatal mistakes I made, so that definitely reduced the stress. I think some of this challenge comes a bit from the gameplay twists thanks to the plot, but also from the map design and the many of the mechanics I've previously mentioned that can benefit both you and the enemies. Towards the end of the game though, as per usual, my army did get pretty powerful, and most units were generally able to stand on their own as practically a one-man army. It maybe wasn't as much of a feeling of power as other games in the series, and there definitely was still danger from some enemies and bosses, but I still really enjoy when I get to this point in the games, as you can really feel the benefits of the level ups. So overall, while the need for challenge isn't as important to me as maybe other people, I did enjoy the difficulty curve this game provided, and I think if you're looking for a more challenging, but still fair Fire Emblem game, this game definitely does that. I certainly enjoyed the maps in this game too, as there's a variety of different locations both indoor and outdoor you travel to throughout the game. Usually each map has something unique going on in them you have to be wary of that differentiates itself from other maps you've played, whether it's from the environment or an enemy having an ability that utilizes the design elements to their favor. While the main story's maps were definitely cool, my favorites were the throwback maps you could do from the side missions. There's a map based on each of the previous Fire Emblem games for each emblem, and this was definitely a fun blast of nostalgia for the ones I have played. They each tried to replicate the experience of playing that map in its original game too, whether it's trying to mimic the game's mechanics or memorable events. Some even have a funny sense of self-awareness, like how a particular map in Binding Blade loves spamming wyverns at you. Admittedly, these flashback maps were pretty formulaic rating-wise. As you'd arrive, the character would say, "Hey, this looks like a place from my world," give some backstory, and then say you have to fight them as a trial. I also find it funny the emblems will straight up kill your units in these levels too. Like, aren't we allies? Despite the fact these flashback levels are clunky when it comes to world building, I did really enjoy them from a gameplay and nostalgic aspect. After each battle in the game too, you can now walk around the map you just played on, and talk to the members in your army, and collect resources. I thought this was a cool concept at first, as it was fun seeing the environment from a new perspective, and seeing the characters' thoughts on it. Although, over time, it lost its appeal to me, as it got a bit repetitive, and felt like a time sink to explore every time. As per usual with the series, I thought the game's soundtrack was amazing, and I really enjoyed it, particularly the battle themes. There were so many catchy songs I'd end up whistling along to that ranged from relaxing to very grand and intense. And like most of the modern Fire Emblems, I love how the songs during a battle go from a more relaxed version on the overhead view to a more intense version for the battle screens. The game definitely has mostly its own original songs, but for the throwback maps, the game has a theme based on the original games for those. And I really enjoyed that, and that's definitely a fan service I greatly appreciated. It was a blast to hear the new versions of the songs, whether it was a more modernized version from the retro titles, or a different take of some of the more modern games. As someone who enjoys the soundtracks of the entire series, these were definitely a major treat for me. I wouldn't say the main gameplay is perfect though, and I definitely had nitpicks with a couple of things. I know early on in the game, I often felt a little frustrated with how many units I could bring into each battle. There's a large cast of characters in this game that join you as you progress, and in the early game you're often getting 1 to 3 new units per battle. However, you'd be limited to only bringing a handful of your previously acquired units in, so it felt hard for me to implement the new characters into my army after their introduction, as it meant dropping some of the few regulars I had to do so. And sometimes the number you could use would drop from the previous battle, which I could tell was them compensating for the fact they give you 3 new units in that battle. So it was almost like it was forcing you to bench units too. Since this is less of a problem later in the game, I wouldn't have minded as much if it was easier to bring anyone who gets behind in levels back up to snuff. However, trying to grind for additional experience points in this game outside of the main story and paralogged side missions is actually hard despite the option being there. There's always random optional battles on old maps you can return to and do if you want additional experience points, resources, or gold. However, in the mid-game, when I felt I could very much utilize these, I noticed the recommended levels for them were generally a bit above my armies, and the couple times I tried them, it did not go well. They were insanely difficult, as the whole map of strong enemies would all rush towards me at once, and there were so many casualties, even rewinding wasn't helpful, leading me to just give up. I'm not sure if this was the case for everyone, or if I somehow just got really unlucky with the levels, but from what I can tell, it seems either it was a design flaw, or they intentionally want to make getting all the extra experience and rewards to be difficult. To add insult to injury with these levels existing, every day they'd reset the location for these, and you'd have to watch the whole animation of them disappearing and reappearing in new spots with no ability to skip, which really felt like a waste of time. So I ended up feeling these weren't worthwhile for me, as usually if I stuck to the same core units, I'd have enough experience to keep up with the main story recommendations. But there were definitely several units I wished I could have included in my army that I couldn't due to them getting too far behind. But I guess when I revisit this game in the future, I can try them out. Despite the nitpicks there, the base gameplay of Engage is definitely its strong point, and every battle was super engaging, and it's what excited me most about the game. My thoughts on the story as I played kind of flipped back and forth a bit, so I have a lot of mixed feelings on it. I'm going to avoid saying major spoilers for the story, but if you want to avoid potentially hearing too much about it, you should jump ahead to the next portion of the video. The setup is that your character, known as the Divine Dragon, wakes up after 1,000 years of sleep and is quickly thrust into a worldwide struggle against the Fell Dragon, who is also reawakened. You and your army are tasked with the mission to collect all 12 of the emblem rings in order to use their power to defeat him, although at the same time, he is trying to collect all the rings too. The game has you traveling between the 4 nations in the world to try and find all of the rings and fight against the Fell Dragon's forces. The story's setup is definitely super simple, and admittedly, the world building isn't as deep as the previous game Three Houses was, so off the bat, I was slightly disappointed by that, but it didn't deter me from playing at all. However, that did give me a negative view of the story at first, and I struggled to get invested in it initially outside of the gameplay, especially as some emotional moments happened early on before I got really attached to any of the characters, so it kinda came across as a bit too melodramatic for me. It doesn't help that much of the game's plot felt like a bit of a collectathon, as a lot of the drive, especially in the early game, was let's go to this location to get a new ring, and you'd come across some conflict or obstacle you need to resolve. I think because of this though, the story did catch me off guard when it would shake things up a bit, and there was one twist in particular I really enjoyed that caught me by surprise. Admittedly, some of the other reveals they had were easy for me to predict, but I noticed as I played, I was really enjoying the story more, and was getting invested. By the late game, when they started delving more into the backstory and tensions were high, I was definitely feeling more motivation to keep going, as I wanted to see how it'd play out. To be honest, I felt the characters in this game weren't that interesting overall, at least compared to other games in the series. The main character, whose default name is Alir, is technically your avatar character that you're taking the role of. Admittedly, besides picking their name and gender, this character is barely an avatar character like the other ones in the series. There's no character customization like in Awakening and Fates, nor any points in the story where you can make decisions like you could in those games and Three Houses. So really, it doesn't feel like this character is one you embody like it felt you could in those other games. I don't have a problem with this per se, as even though I like that aspect in previous games, it isn't necessary for me. I just feel they made this character an avatar like the previous ones just to carry on the tradition at this point, even if it has no purpose or effect on the story at all. I wasn't a huge fan of their character at first either, as they seemed a bit too wholesome and boring, with their one character flaw being their fear of the undead corrupted. As per usual with Fire Emblem avatar characters, a lot of the cast have an obsession with them, and they definitely go to the extreme with that here. I felt some characters definitely got a bit annoying with their worship of them, although there was one case where I felt it was actually a welcome thing, as the character's backstory for it was good. The game seems at least self-aware of the absurdity of some of the characters' extreme worship of Alir, as they often get uncomfortable with it. As I progressed through the game, Alir did grow on me over time though, as their character developed and I learned their backstory more. Definitely far from my favorite protagonist in the series, but definitely a unique one I ended up liking in the end. I admittedly wasn't super invested in a lot of the rest of the cast either, at least as a start. A lot of the characters were not the most exciting for me, and some were kind of annoying. There were definitely a few fun characters I did find intriguing from their introduction, and didn't disappoint me as they developed. And as usual, I gave all of the characters a chance, and some of them did grow on me over time through their supports. However, I definitely felt the characters are a downgrade in general, especially compared to Three Houses, where every character there felt like they were really thought out and deep. It definitely feels some of the characters in Engage don't entirely escape being anything more than their main character trait. There's definitely some interesting characters I wish I used, and got to know more though. But at least from the ones I did use, they were probably one of my least favorite cast of characters I've used in the series. I think because of how underbaked the usable characters felt, it led me to be pleasantly surprised with the villains. Throughout the game, there's a group of reoccurring villains known as the Four Hounds, who, 3 out of the 4 of them just come across as evil for evil's sake. And since my expectations were kinda low, I didn't expect them to be anything more than that. And for most of the game, that does not change at all. But towards the later chapters, these characters do get expanded on and developed more, which was a pleasant surprise for me, and definitely helped shift the story into a more positive light in my mind. Even the main villain, who is pretty much the personification of straight up evil, eventually got some backstory too. It doesn't try and make him not anything but pure evil, but I like how it at least gives a reason for why he is the way he is. I think these characters getting some development helped me feel there actually was some heart to the story, and it wasn't as bare bones as I initially felt. Overall, I definitely was mixed on the writing and story of the game, as especially coming after 3 Houses, it felt like a downgrade in that department. I can see that people will probably have different opinions on the story too. Some people might get invested in the plot and find joy in its twists and turns, while others may find it to be weak or even a bit cringy. I know I was a bit on both sides of the coin there, as some of it was not to my taste, but other moments really got me engaged. Overall though, I would not say the game's story is its strongest point, and many other Fire Emblem games in my opinion have a better storyline than this. The length of this game is definitely a bit of a long one too. I know compared to the times on how long to beat, my playtimes for Fire Emblem games tend to be above average, and that was definitely the case for this one, as it took me 94 hours and 21 minutes to complete. This is definitely the longest it's taken me to finish a game in the series, even beating out my first playthrough of 3 Houses' 85 hours, which definitely took me by surprise. There are 26 chapters in the main story, and if you want to do all of the side levels, there are 12 for each emblem in addition to 3 other paralogs, leading to a total of 41 unique levels. I also had the DLC, which adds even more side levels, but I only dabbled with one of those just to check it out. The levels in this game can definitely get pretty long as the game progresses, sometimes taking me an hour or 2 to get through a chapter. The quantity of levels I think definitely adds to the time, but I feel the real time killer for me in this game that really boosted my time was the side content. Which, I have to say, the side content definitely wasn't my favorite aspect of this game, as it drained me a bit and often sapped my motivation to play. Granted, these side activities are all optional, and I could have avoided it for most of the game, but there are aspects of it I wanted to experience, and these activities do have a benefit for the main gameplay. Most of the side activities take place on your base on a floating island known as the Somnial. I could immediately see their inspiration here was the Academy from 3 Houses, as you can walk around and interact with the characters in your army, and have access to a lot of different activities that have a variety of benefits. However, I felt this was definitely a lazier version of a home base compared to 3 Houses, and instead of adding to the game experience, it just made it feel like a chore. In 3 Houses, every character had something new to say each month that related to the events going on in the story and the world. While here, besides a few characters having something new to say occasionally, they all had the same exact comments every time. So besides the first couple interactions with them, talking to your units here feels pretty pointless for the most part. I feel they saved the more unique dialogue for the post-battle maps though. However, even that felt like a chore, since oftentimes you'd have to speak to them again after their generic, "Ooh, I really feel I improved in this battle" quote to access the unique comment. So it really just ate up time talking to all of them there too. And also, once you gain too many characters, not everyone is always present at the Somnial to talk to. So sometimes you'll have to reset it by leaving or resting to have them maybe pop up to talk to. I feel all of this made the already weaker cast even less intriguing to interact with, and eventually it felt almost pointless to me. There are a lot of different mini-games you can do in the Somnial too, like working out, tarot cards, a wyvern shooting game, and even the video game classic fishing. These help you with your stats for the next battle, or give you resources. Admittedly, all the minigames here definitely felt like a bit of a time killer and not super fruitful. So those ones in particular, I eventually stopped doing because they felt like a big waste of time for me. Other activities like ring polishing, meal cooking, and bonding activities I kept doing each visit though, as the benefits of those outweighed my boredom of doing them, as they increased the support and bond levels between the characters. Not every activity at the Somnial was bad though, as I did enjoy the arena battles, as it was always fun to see your units battle each other, even if the pairings were randomly generated. Weapon upgrading was nice too, and it felt rewarding to improve the equipment of my army. even though it did drain all the funds I had in the game. I also really liked the pet adoption feature. It was a cute addition, and it was fun being able to adopt all the animals I'd see in the post-battle maps. Admittedly, it did feel kinda pointless after a while, as eventually I just hit all the dog types set up in my little farm area to give me extra ores. But it was still a wholesome feature, I felt, and not too time-consuming. There is also a weird fantasy dog-like creature that lives at the Somnial that follows you around. You can name it, customize its appearance, and interact with it, and it will give you boosts in minigames if you bond with it. Sadly, taking care of this creature is a time killer too, and has no story significance, but it is rewarding as it gave me the currency needed to level up my emblems more, so I carried on with it. Overall, it was a cute and wholesome feature though, that I felt didn't do any harm with its inclusion in the game. The support system returns per usual as something you can do on the side too in this game. Like others in the series, as your units work together in battle, their bond level with each other grows, and you can unlock conversations between the two that give permanent stat boosts in combat together. I always enjoy these in all the Fire Emblem games they're in, as it generally gives a mini storyline with these two characters, and you get to learn more about them and see them bond together, making you get more attached to them. Admittedly though, I wasn't as invested in them this time around, I feel. Maybe I was spoiled by the quality of Three Houses writing, but a lot of these seemed a lot less interesting to me. I still tried to do the max amount of supports I could, and did enjoy some of them still, but they definitely felt lackluster. It also didn't help that they didn't feel as easy to access either, as usually there's a very quick to click menu to get to them, but here it's hidden behind another menu. Maybe this was to encourage you to talk to them at the Somnial to activate the support conversation, but that feels tedious too and only works with the conversations with your character. Whatever the case, I just felt it was in a weird spot. In addition to the supports, each character can also have bond conversations with all the Emblem Ring characters as their level with them increases. I'm glad they included this, and it feels like a great idea in spirit to expand on the past characters more and connect them to your army. But I couldn't help feeling the execution of them was lazy. Since they had to make a conversation for each character with each emblem, you could tell they didn't push for quality, and for each conversation level they'd say a total of 1 line to each other. However, once they reached the max bond level, they would say an increased number of 2 lines to each other. As a result, most of these conversations felt really shallow, and there is barely any storylines or character development in them. I also wish they could have implemented a way for the Emblem Rings to interact and talk to each other outside of the main story too. I do think these support and bond conversations are the best side content outside of the main gameplay, but overall they do feel lackluster and weaker in writing compared to other Fire Emblem games. It really feels this game went for quantity over quality with its side content, and unlike Three Houses, which also had a lot of side content, this game failed to make it engaging and feel like a natural part of the experience. In Three Houses, because of the school aspect, everything felt like it was helping you build your units to be how you wanted them, and everything you did in the side content mattered in the long run. It all fit into the world building, and added to the experience of the main battles. And while some of the side content here in Engage felt like it mattered in the long run, like anything to do with the rings, a lot of it felt disconnected from the rest of the experience, and often boosts you gained were temporary for just one battle. It doesn't help that your base is located on a floating island separated from the rest of the world, and has no connection to the plot besides being a safe place enemies can't access. And Three Houses also limited how much side content you could do each month in the game, so you had to pick and choose what to do, which made it all feel strategic. Here in Engage, after any battle, whether for the main story or on the side, every activity refreshes for you to do again. So if you really want to maximize everything, you're going to be redoing each of the activities every time, and it got very tedious very fast for me. It feels there's no strategy behind it, and it quickly felt like a chore I had to do between each battle to experience the most this game offers and make my army the best they can be. Often trying to do everything at the Somnial would put me to sleep, discouraging me from playing the more fun aspect of the game until my next play session. I did eventually give up on anything I felt wasn't necessary for the long-term stuff I wanted to experience, like supports and ring leveling, but even then it still felt like a slog I had to get through before going into the next battle. I do feel this game's positives outshine the problems with it, and I'm glad I got to experience and play it. Admittedly, if it weren't for my love of the series, I'm not sure if I would have persevered through all of the side content. But at the same time, that was probably also the main reason I didn't just ignore all of that once it started to feel tedious. The main levels definitely had me wanting to come back for more though, and were definitely a lot of fun and were really hitting that strategic itch for me. It also is probably the best looking 3D Fire Emblem so far too, and a lot of the battle animations are fun to watch. And while I thought the story was so-so, the parts that did hook me had me eager to see how it'll turn out. I feel the game was way too long though, and from how it was designed, I feel it shouldn't have been longer than 3 houses was for me. I know the time it took me to complete was completely my own fault though, and I'm sure most people would get through it much quicker than I did. I feel overall it is a good game, although if I were to rank the games in the series, it is one of the lowest for me, mainly due to how much of a chore it felt to get through. And even though its main gameplay is definitely great, as a whole package it just wasn't as engrossing to me as most of the others in the series. I think it's still one I'd be down to replay again in the future though, and I definitely want to give the DLC storyline a whirl at some point. I'd also say I'd recommend if this game seems of interest to you, but you've never played any of the other games in the series, to play at least one or more of them before this one. Seeing you probably have a Switch if you're considering this game, I'd say play 3 Houses over this first, and if you have access to Awakening on the 3DS or any of the GBA ones, to play at least one of those before this too. Gameplay wise, this game will still be welcoming to beginners with teaching you the basics, and the main story doesn't call back to the other games enough for you to be lost, so it stands on its own. However, since I feel this game does have its rough patches, and it is a bit of a celebration of the series as a whole, it would be better to play one of the stronger games before this one. That said, if you have played games in the series before and have liked them, I definitely say you should give this a go. It's far from perfect, but it's still very good gameplay wise, if nothing else, and it does act like a crossover of all the games, so you'll probably enjoy all the references to the ones you've played. At the end of the day, even if it isn't as strong as others, it still is a solid game and what I feel is a great series. And if you know you like strategy RPG games or think Engage just looks fun, I'm sure you'll find joy in playing and building your army through the story. Just don't expect it to be a masterclass of writing, or don't push yourself to do everything like I did, unless you know you just really want to experience everything to the max. Hope you all enjoyed the video. This is definitely the longest review video I've made so far, so I definitely appreciate you sticking around to the end. I definitely had a lot of thoughts on the game through the year plus I spent playing, and I'm glad I could finally share them. I would love to hear your thoughts on the video and game in the comments too. If you're interested in seeing more Fire Emblem from me, I've started Path of Radiance during the time I've been making this, so definitely stay tuned for my video on that in the future. My goal is to eventually play all the games I haven't someday, and I hope to revisit all the ones I already have again too. So if you want to hear me talk about those more in the future, or you're interested in seeing more of my videos in general, definitely critical hit that subscribe button, and you'll be seeing more from me soon. Thanks for watching.
I lost. Fair and square.
I might have to write a book about this.